we talk about in the support group how none of us are better dads than anyone else, right? We are all coming to fatherhood from our own history and experiences and value systems, et cetera, and lived realities, and that we are all doing the best that we can with the resources that we have available. And there are some dads who have a lot more resources in order to be the best dads that they can, and some who have different or fewer resources. But those lack of resources doesn't equate to a lack of desire to be a father, a lack of desire to do their best.
We first met at the Fatherhood Summit, which was held in Tacoma this past June, and it was hosted by the Washington Fatherhood Council. I was there representing Washington Initiative for Boys and Men, and you were there because you are the dad specialist, or at least a dad specialist with Perinatal Support Washington and their peer support phone line where people can call and get advice and encouragement. I understand you're a father of three kids.
Yeah, I've got a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old.
Perinatal Support Washington. So I looked up the word perinatal because it's not one that I use in my everyday life. And if I understand right, it refers to the period around childbirth.
We support families in the perinatal period, which for us is anywhere from the conception journey through pregnancy, childbirth, the newborn phase, up to about 2 years old. So we're supporting families who are, dealing with fertility issues, for example, miscarriages, infant or preterm loss, and then also folks who are pregnant, folks who have recently given birth, and then folks with young kids up to about 2 years old.
Perinatal Support Washington has a warm line, it's referred to as, and that's different from a hotline because you call it and you're not necessarily going to have someone pick up right away, although you might if it's during business hours. But within a short period of time, you'll be called back, and you'll be called back. One of the things that's unique is it's peer support. So these are people that have similar experiences to ones that you're calling about. How are men finding out about Perinatal Support Washington, and in particular the fact that it's a father-friendly place where you can call and people know how to talk to dads, and you might even talk to a dad?
I would say we get a lot of provider referrals. So we get a lot of folks reaching out to the warm line because when families check out from the hospital, if they give birth in a hospital, they check out, they often get a packet of information with resources. And so our flyer is one of those in a lot of the hospitals in Washington State. But then they might also hear about it in pre or postnatal visits with a provider like a midwife or an OB. We get referred to from doulas, so birth support workers around Washington State. We get a lot of referrals as well that come directly from providers who are working with clients. So it might be a therapist, it might be a social worker at the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU, that say, hey, I know you've been going through a tough time. Here's a resource in the community that you can access. And so they'll refer their clients to us that way. And then I specifically get a lot of my referrals through spouses and partners. So we'll have, a wife or a mom or a partner who's concerned about or has challenges with their husband, with the father of their child, and they're wanting, they're saying, hey, they call the warm line for themselves. Maybe they're struggling from traumatic birth or postpartum depression or something. And they're like, hey, and I'm kind of concerned about my husband. I'm kind of concerned about my partner. What kind of support do you have for him? And then our warm line volunteers get to say, well, we actually have a dad specialist on staff who could talk with him directly. And then I'll also say that I run a weekly support group as well for new dads. And so there's a lot of cross-pollination between people who call into the warm line, find out that there's a support group for dads, dads come to the support group. I'm facilitating and I say, hey, by the way, I also work one-on-one offering peer support directly to dads. And then they reach out to me after the support group and say, yeah, it'd be great to be able to connect one-on-one. And likewise, I'll talk to dads on the group or to dads on the phone that I'm always pitching my support group as well. But, hey, you should join a group of like-minded dads who are working hard to do their best and come join us and talk with us. So there's a lot of back and forth that happens between the group and the warm line as well.
Okay. So there's a lot of referrals involved. It's not always a guy seeing a poster or a flyer, but I am curious, marketing materials are things that you can be thoughtful about more or less so when it comes to uh, sending signals that it's a father welcoming service or organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, the imagery that we see is so powerful, right? If you're only ever seeing images of moms and babies, then over time you get that reinforced idea that an organization is only supporting moms and babies, right? And so it's the same thing if if you're only seeing white moms, then you might think, oh, this isn't for me if you're a person of color, right? So it's important to have diverse representation in your imagery. And so likewise with dads and men, seeing dads, seeing these, beautiful photos of dads holding babies or dads playing with babies, or that reinforces the idea that fathers are important, that fathers play a critical role, and that they are welcome at this organization and will be supported if they reach out. Certainly, we have dads in the imagery that we share. Um, Definitely in the flyers related to me and the work that I do, it'll show dads. And then part of what Perinatal Support Washington also does is we run a lot of trainings for providers who are supporting parents. And so the trainings that we offer will also have training specifically focused on supporting fathers or supporting dads.
Have you done a training or a webinar for the Washington Fatherhood Council?
I have not yet. I've attended a lot of them. I've worked closely with Ann Stone, who's the head of the Fatherhood Council. She and I have met several times and had wonderful conversations, and I really appreciate the work that she and the council do.
So let's say a referral has happened and a dad learns about Perinatal Support Washington, calls the number. What's the next thing that happens?
So dad calls the number if it's during business hours, so roughly kind of 9 to 4:30, that during the daytime, Monday through Friday. It'll be live answered by a warm line volunteer who will talk to the dad and find out more about their story and why they called. And then they'll always ask, we have a dad on staff, a dad specialist who works with dads. Would you like to be connected with him? And if they say yes, which many of them do, are excited to know that there's a dad that they can talk to, then I get a message. I get a message that says, "Hey, I just spoke with a dad today who'd love to talk to you." And then he and I connect and find a time to talk later that day or the next day. I always preface my meetings with dads to say that I am not a licensed therapist or counselor, that what I offer is peer support. So I don't diagnose, I don't prescribe. What I offer is the support from one dad to another of, hey, I've been there. I've been through some tough times myself as a dad in our journey to becoming parents. I hear you. I know that what you're going through is really difficult, and let's talk together about your story, about what you're going through, and I can offer, that affirmation, that feedback, some of my own experience, and then also help them to find additional resources or referrals. So, would you like to talk to a therapist? Would you like me to help you find a therapist? Would you like to find a support group? Can I send you blog posts or articles to help support you with whatever the challenges that you're dealing with right now? So, most of our time together is spent with me just listening to their story and hearing what brought them to reach out in the first place. And then there's also some pieces of helping them to get access to supports and referrals out in the community to make sure they're getting all of the resources that they can to be the best dad that they can.
How often does a first interaction with a dad result in follow-up interactions, more conversations with that same guy?
One of the important parts of our model at the warm line is it's not just a one and done. So everyone who calls the warm line has a 1 week follow-up call with us as well. And a email follow-up with the resources that we talked about in the conversation. So there's always a follow-up with the dads. It's never just a one-time conversation. I'm always talking to them at least one other time after that initial call to check in and say, hey, last time we talked about your struggles with sleep. How have sleep been going this past week? Have you been able to implement any of the strategies that we talked about? Hey, last week we were talking about the miscommunications you were having with your wife. How have things been going this past week? Have things been better? Do you need additional ideas or support or resources to help with communication? So there's always follow up. So, it's really important to us that we are offering ourselves as supporters through this whole process and not cutting people off. It's if I get to the end of, let's say we've been talking for 45 minutes, if I were doing professional therapy, that would be about the time that the therapist says, well, I'd like to, just I'm looking at the clock and seeing that it's about time for us to end our session. Regardless of whether you're right in the middle of talking about some big emotional thing that happened, right? And that's because that's the model of therapy. But what's great about peer support is if they're in the middle of an emotional story and I've got the time, I can sit with them. I can stay with them. And so, one of the wonderful things about the warm line is just the way in which we really want to be there for them through every step and offer our services, even if it's, I'm doing much better. I don't think we need to continue talking. But then a month from now, something happens, or kid goes to the hospital, or they get triggered by something, or maybe they get pregnant again. I've had a lot of dads where I worked with them, and then a year or two later, they have another kid, and they reach out again because we've already made that connection and say, "Hey, Nathan, I'd love to chat again. We've got another big life event coming up, and I'd love to reach out and talk." So there's a lot of follow-up that happens to make sure that, we're only, you know, saying goodbye or leaving people when they are feeling ready for that, when they feel like they have the resources and support outside of the warm line in order to move forward.
How many years have you been a dad support specialist with Perinatal Support Washington? And were you the first?
About 2.5 years, and yes, I was the first one, and Perinatal Support Washington has been um, really doing a lot of wonderful work at supporting parents, and specifically the last few years focusing on um, focusing on parents who haven't had the focus before, who haven't had focus on them before professionally. And so when I was hired, we also brought on a Spanish language parent support specialist as well, so that we could support folks in their native language. We brought on a Black or African American parent support specialist as well to make sure that Black moms are getting the extra support that they need. And then I was brought on as well to support dads, to make sure that dads and non-birthing partners were getting the support that they need, with this recognition that, as you and I know, there has been a lack of support and resources in calling out specifically how are we making sure that dads are getting the care that they need to be the best parents that they can. And so PSWA recognized that a few years ago, sought funding specifically for this position, and then hired me on to be in this role. And when I started, my application was to apply for a position that was maybe 10 to 20 hours a month. But now, 2 years, 2.5 years into this, it's, more like 10 hours a week. So it's still part-time for me, but the hours have definitely increased significantly because the volume of dads who are reaching out has increased significantly. And I think that is such a great reminder that when resources become available, people will take advantage of those resources, right? It's not that dads don't care; it's that they might not know that there's someone out there to support them. It's not that they don't want to do their best or be the best parent they can. It's that nobody's ever asked them, "How are you? How is parenting going for you?" For very logical reasons, the kind of perinatal care is very focused on the mom. How is she? How is her health? How is her mental health? Um, and very frequently, when a dad reaches out to the warm line, we are the first ones who ever asks them, "Hey, Dad, how are you doing? What do you need?" The increase in the number of dads who are reaching out, I think, speaks volumes to the fact that there is a need, there is a desire for this kind of support and connection, to make sure that dads are getting the resources they need to be the best parents that they can be.
What do we know about the extent of need for peer support for dads for perinatal related matters compared to the current uptake of that support?
My sense is when I started, let's use this as an example. When I started running the support group, I've been running the support group for about a year and change. When I started the support group, it was twice a month that I was running it. And within the first maybe 6 months or so, we went from, say, 5 to 7 dads in a group to 15 or so dads each time. And I was like, that's great. And I can't meet everyone's needs in a group if there's that many people, it's only an hour and a half support group. So we made the decision about a year ago, let's do this as a weekly support group. And so we went from twice a month to every week, and that kind of evened out the numbers a little bit. So now we were getting maybe 5 to 7 dads in a group. And then over time, even though we're meeting weekly, now we're starting to get 10, 10, 12, 14 dads coming every week to the support group. Some who are coming for the first time, some who are coming all the time, some who are dropping in here and there. Um, but, to me, again, anytime you see that really significant trend of numbers of more people taking advantage of something, that really speaks to not that we manufactured a need that wasn't there, but that we started offering something where the need already existed in the community, and now suddenly we're offering something, and so people are taking advantage of that. And so I really feel like there is a great need for dads to get additional support, and I'm so happy to be part of a network at the Washington Fatherhood Council of other people who are really focused on supporting dads. There are a number of organizations around the state who are focused on supporting dads. And I know again, anecdotally, there's a dad support group in Bellingham that was meeting once a month. Now they're going to start meeting more often as well because they're seeing a need increase. I had a male therapist who reached out to me who's wanting to start his own support group as well. There's a support group that specifically focuses on Black dads over on the east side, over in the Spokane area, that's popped up in the last few years. So I see more of a recognition of the importance of supporting dads because we know from the research how important it is to have dads and fathers and non-birthing partners in a child's life, and that we offer um, we offer important and different supports to kids than moms do, and that's critical to their upbringing.
Peer support from dad to dad, I'm sure, is something that is going on all the time, whether or not there's organizations like Perinatal Support Washington offering it. One of the many benefits of talking to you and people that are experienced is that you have all this experience that then reveal these patterns, so you can be a lot more helpful than my friend who just randomly gets a call from me and he's busy with something else and he's like, let me try to think of how to help this guy.
Yeah, peer support is a fancy way to talk about friendship, right? That is exactly what you're talking about is exactly true. In every time in history and everywhere now, people are getting and giving peer support to each other. It just means that you're not a professional. You are someone who has your own lived experience, and you're speaking to somebody with shared lived experience. I think the big difference is, especially as men, we aren't often trained how to be emotional caretakers. And so and it is a real skill. It's a skill to know how to listen well, how to reflect back, how to be a caring presence without making it about yourself, right? Those are all skills that you have to learn over time, and they're not ones that people take as much time with boys in helping to teach them. And so it's really a skill that we as men are perfectly capable of doing and excelling at, if we're given the time and opportunity to do so. And so, as kind of an aside, you didn't ask this question, but I'll answer it anyway, which is if you are offering support to a friend, or if you're being asked for support from a friend who's going through a tough time, becoming a new dad or whatever, I think the two biggest things that I would say is don't interrupt and don't offer advice. And here I'm offering advice about don't offer advice, but those are the two. But in the support group, they're kind of the two big things that I think makes the biggest difference in truly feeling heard and cared for by someone is, are they actually listening to me, or are they interrupting, jumping in, trying to make it about themselves, right? So actually listen, don't interrupt when someone's talking, and don't offer advice, because even when it is well-meaning, advice can often feel like criticism or judgment, and it can really shut down a conversation. And so if somebody's coming to you for support, hey man, I'm really struggling, I'm having a hard time, parenting isn't what I expected, you can just say, yeah, that sounds hard, rather than, oh man, everyone goes through that. You know what you need to do? You just need to go for a run. That'll make you feel better, because it's, even though it is well-meaning, even though you're trying to care for somebody, it really can come across as, oh, you have an agenda. You want me to just do what you're doing. You're not actually listening to what I care about. So that's one thing I'll just say about the peer support that exists in the world is it's wonderful, it's important, and I think we can do I think we can do better in terms of how we support each other, if we are really learning how to listen well.
Recently, Seattle's NPR radio station KUOW, they did a piece entitled "Taking on the Challenges of Fatherhood: One Phone Call at a Time." And the reporter Diana Opong, she interviews you and your manager, I believe, the manager of the Warm Line, Victoria Cherniak. And they're talking about the telehelp that Perinatal Support Washington offers. At one point, Miss Opong puts a question to Miss Cherniak where she says, there tends to be a societal perception that fathers play a secondary role to mothers in child rearing, suggesting that they're less important in raising children. And she's asking Ms. Cherniak, is it true that fathers are less essential to a child's development than mothers? And Victoria's answer makes me emotional because she says no, and then she laughs. And the fact that she laughs, it's like, no, absolutely not. We got to get beyond that. She's emphatically saying no, and she says it's definitely not true, and she goes on to provide some evidence that that's the case, and so but I'm curious. The fact that the reporter raised that question makes me wonder for you. Have you observed examples of what she's talking about when she says the perception that fathers play a secondary role, and what can that kind of perception look like? How does it play out?
I'll say like when I when I talk to dads, and a lot of times I'm talking to dads, like I mentioned before, who this might be the first time that somebody's asking how you're doing, and so they're not practiced in sharing their emotions and sharing what they're going through and opening up and being vulnerable and honest with a stranger. A lot of times what I'll hear is, well, I didn't know that men could get to postpartum depression. And I didn't know that this was going to be hard for me because I'm not the mom. And so to me, it really speaks to the fact exactly what you're saying, that there is a perception out there that dads are secondary or are not as invested in the well-being of their children. And as soon as you spend any amount of time talking to dads, and I mean not just dads who are living with their children, but also dads who are co-parenting and who don't see their children that often, that no matter who you're talking to, if you're talking to a dad, that very quickly you come to understand how deeply they love and care about their children and want to do right by them and want to do what they can. And we talk about in the support group how none of us are better dads than anyone else, right? We are all coming to fatherhood from our own history and experiences and value systems, et cetera, and lived realities, and that we are all doing the best that we can with the resources that we have available. And there are some dads who have a lot more resources in order to be the best dads that they can, and some who have different or fewer resources. But those lack of resources doesn't equate to a lack of desire to be a father, a lack of desire to do their best. It's definitely a harmful belief system to have that dads aren't as important, or dads are secondary, because um, it hurts children, but it also hurts us as men have to have those low expectations of us, to feel like, oh, people don't think that I can be as caring or as loving as my spouse is, when that's not true, when we're perfectly capable of being tender and emotional, and that strength and being a provider, which are, these kind of ideas of fatherhood, a lot of ideas of fatherhood around being a provider, being strong, um, that those are not mutually exclusive with being tender and vulnerable and playful and all those other things that we get to be as dads. So those things can exist together. It's not an this or that, but it's a this and that we get to exist in our full humanity with all of the nuance of lived experience and emotion, that moms and women get when they become parents.
In that KUOW interview, Victoria Cherniak points out that it's important for dads to learn to soothe their babies. And she says when a baby's upset, it's often a go-to response to just hand the baby to the person who has breasts, because that's probably what'll calm the baby down. But doing that, handing the baby over, isn't always a necessity. What are ways that dads soothe their baby?
Dads are great soothers. Dads are great soothers, partly out of necessity because most of us are not breastfeeding, and so most of us can't breastfeed, and so we have to be creative and come up with other solutions for soothing our kids. When kids cry, it's their way of communicating. When babies are crying, that's their method of communication. So it can mean a lot of different things. And I found that dads are really good at speaking baby and deciphering like, oh, well, that cry means they need a change of diaper. That cry means that they're tired. That cry means that they're hungry. And dads are great at doing that, and then figuring out, okay, well, so I'm going to soothe my baby by offering them what it is that they need. Maybe it is handing them over to the person, for breastfeeding, but maybe they're bottle fed and they can feed the baby just in the same way. Maybe they need to go for a walk and just need to be bounced. Maybe they need to be played with. Dads are great at figuring out what's baby trying to communicate to me, and then finding creative solutions to meet that need and help the baby calm down.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. My older brother, by the way, has two kids, but they've always lived far away, and so I haven't observed much of the day-to-day of fathering. When we
Mm.
visit, it's during vacations and we're out going to activities. It's not the real life as
Yeah.
much.
And that's something too, we talk about is a lot of times I'll talk to dads who are like, well, I'm just not as good at this as my wife is. Um, and my often response is, it's probably because you're not as practiced as she is. Because we live in a much more kind of age segregated society than a lot of traditional cultures or a lot of other places in the world, or even other places in the US. Speaking for myself, living kind of in an urban area, that we live in our individual houses, and we might not be in an extended family, like we were when we were, back in the days when we were all living more indigenous tribal lives, where we were in communities with children, with elders, where being a being a parent was a much more fluid idea of caretaking, right? That you were always around people that you were helping to caretake for. But now you can go 37 years before you become a parent without ever actually having to do a lot of caretaking for kids. And so when you become a parent, you feel, oh, I'm not good at this. I'm bad. My wife is much better. And the truth is, if you have a 1 week old child, you're only a 1 week old parent. You've only been doing this for a week. You still are learning every day. And so I often talk with dads about, give yourself the grace and understanding to know that you're still learning, that every day you're becoming a better father because you're taking those lessons, and you make mistakes, and then you pick yourself up and you do it again tomorrow, and maybe you make a different mistake, but you're learning each day. And it's not a failure. It's not a failure on your part. And it's not because biologically, as a man, you're not capable of knowing these things. It's just because you don't have practice. And how do we learn? Well, we practice, and we do it every day, and we try it out, and we try new things, and we ask questions, and you learn and you get better over time.
Do you know anything about the funding sources for Perinatal Washington? Is this mostly publicly funded service?
Um, as a nonprofit, we have a diverse funding stream. We get individual donations from folks who care about the work that we do. We get donations from foundations who support organizations working in the perinatal world, and then we do also get state funding from the state of Washington in order to do the work that we do, because and it's been great, is that the state has recognized that supporting parents at this time, when they are new parents, makes a big difference on health outcomes, and so both physical and emotional health outcomes. And so we're also really lucky to get some support from the state as well.